Rainstorm night. The pouring rain was mixed with a few muffled thunders and crackling sounds. I woke up from my dream. I subconsciously want to hold Sydney Warren's hand and absorb the warmth, but it was empty. I walked to the living room. Sydney Warren didn't know when he got up. He was frantically putting on his coat, his brow furrowed, and his eyes were full of worry. I thought something had happened to his family, and I asked with concern, "Do you want me to come with you?" Sydney Warren heard my voice, and his hand paused, and he went back to normal. "No, it's my mother's old mistake again. Aren't you going to the company tomorrow? Rest well, I'll just go alone." I didn't force it, but nodded and instructed, "I know you're worried about Auntie, but now it's raining heavily, so you have to drive slowly. There is an umbrella next to the passenger seat. Remember to hold it when you get out of the car." And my words were interrupted by an impatient TSK from Sydney Warren. Gone. He didn't look at me again, pushed the door open and left. Outside the window, lightning and thunder continued. The fear that was buried in the deepest part of my heart was ticked out. "I don't feel sleepy." A man sat all night in the living room with the lights on. By the time the rain stopped, it was already completely light. I moved my stiff body and prepared to wash up and go to work. Sydney Warren is back. His face was flushed with abnormal hot flashes, and he looked sickly, as if he was about to collapse in the next second. I hurried over to help him. Sydney Warren buried her head in the side of my neck and rubbed it, the hot heat making me frown unconsciously. "You have a fever," Sydney Warren replied vaguely, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Sister, don't go to work today. Stay at home and take care of me." I didn't hesitate and agreed. I helped Sydney Warren back to the bedroom, fed him cold medicine, and carefully wiped him with a hot towel. Sydney Warren fell asleep quickly. I thought I'd clean up and catch up on sleep. Just as he picked up the medicine cup on the bedside table, Sydney Warren's cell phone rang unfortunately. The message is displayed on the screen. It was a person named Sophia who sent him Weshit. "Senior, thanks to you for coming to accompany me last night. Otherwise, I will definitely be scared to cry alone. But I see that your face was not good when you left. Are you sick? Is your workaholic girlfriend at home? Do you need me to take care of you?" One top message after another. It made my head, which had not slept all night and swoon, ache even more. I picked up Sydney Warren's phone and typed in the date we were officially in a relationship. Row, I've been mentally prepared for it, but when I saw the 4 words of the wrong password, I still felt a suffocating pain in my heart. In the end, I used Sydney Warren's fingerprint to unlock the phone. I clicked into the chat box and it was clean, except for the message from the girl. Everything else was empty. I was back in Sophia's circle of friends. The latest one was sent last night, shortly before Sydney Warren left the house. "It's unlucky. I went to the countryside to sketch and encountered a rare heavy rainstorm in the city. I'm so scared to sleep alone. Does anyone want to come and accompany me? TT." The accompanying picture is a selfie of her. Slap face, long black hair, nightdress straps are thinly squeezed on thin shoulders, and pure desire is written all over the face. This face is familiar to me. During Sydney Warren's junior year, I often picked him up from his school. He would always be followed by this girl at that time. I once asked him who it was. Sydney Warren replied nonchalantly, "A student in the same department." With that, he slowly leaned down and approached me. A pair of peach blossom eyes smiled. "Sister, you can't be jealous when you ask this, right? I'll start by saying okay. You're the only person I've ever liked in my life." I turned off my phone and calmed down. Suddenly, something came to my mind. He entered a string of numbers with trembling fingertips. Sydney Warren's phone is untied. I finally gave up and hooked my lips self-deprecatingly. What I lost was the day when Sophia first appeared with him. When I learned that Sydney Warren was mentally cheating, I didn't say anything. Life goes on as usual. The only difference was that I took over the assignment that the company assigned to me. My girlfriend was very incredible after hearing it. "Didn't you say that you were afraid that the foreign relationship would affect your relationship with Sydney Warren, and you should refuse? Why are you going again all of a sudden?" I took a bite of the macaron, and the sweet taste made me frown instantly. It occurred to me that I didn't like sweets until I met Sydney Warren. It was only after living together that I discovered that Sydney Warren had a penchant for sweetness, and I changed my taste in order to accommodate him. Over time, even when Sydney Warren wasn't there, I would habitually order according to his taste. I put down my fork and took a sip of my coffee. The bitterness dilutes the toothache-inducing sweetness in the mouth. I replied softly. Maybe it's because I don't want to give in. A rare day off. Stella and I walked around until nearly 11 o'clock. On the drive home, I received a call from Sydney Warren. It was his friend calling. Sister Sarah Peacock. Sydney Warren. He's drunk too much. Clamoring for you to pick up. I didn't embarrass him, and casually responded, send me the address. By the time I arrived at my destination, half an hour has passed. As soon as I turned into the hallway, I heard a faint conversation in the box. A familiar name sounded. I heard someone ask, did you really sleep with Sophia? How does it taste like to tie flowers? It's definitely better than that old woman in your family. Sydney Warren's tone was laid back, and there was disdain in every word he spoke. That's it. But at least it's better than Sarah Peacock. As soon as Sydney Warren finished speaking, a disgusting laugh followed. It seems that he looks pure, but he may not be pure in private. But aren't you afraid of being discovered by Sarah Peacock? Sydney Warren picked up his glass, and poured another one. He drank too much, and began to speak. Sarah Peacock. He scoffed. You don't know how bad her original family is. Her mother ran away a long time ago, and her father is a psychopath. Even if he finds out that I am cheating, at most he will mess with me. She is so lacking in love. She can't do without me. I choked in my throat, and pinched my nails into my palms to maintain my sanity as I was about to break. I remember the first time I talked to Sydney Warren about my family of origin. He cupped my cheek and kissed away a series of falling tears. At that time, Sydney Warren only had pain in his eyes for me. He was short of breath and choked several times, and said to me in a precious and solemn manner, Sarah Peacock, will I love you in the future? In the box, Sydney Warren was still talking. He hasn't changed much over the years. The only difference is that he now uses my sore spot as a weakness to pinch me. Besides, I'm just playing with Sophia. Anyway, I'll still marry her in the end. What's so much about her? If I were 5 years younger, after hearing this, I will definitely push the door in, give Sydney Warren a hard lesson, and dump him again. But now, I just calmly press the pause button of the recording and back up the audio. I paused outside the door for a moment, and raised my hand to knock on the door. When I entered, Sydney Warren's friends all smiled, and greeted me. I couldn't tell from their faces the constant malice they had towards me. It seems that the old saying is true. Things are gathered by like, and people are grouped. Sydney Warren's friends can act just like him. I pulled out my keys, and just opened the door. A drunken Sydney Warren couldn't wait to hug him. His wine-scented pecking kiss landed on my neck. Sister, I want to. Almost the first second Sydney Warren put it up, my stomach churned. I jerked my hand and pushed him away. Luckily, Sydney Warren was really too drunk, and I pushed him hard, and he slammed on the back of the sofa, and fell asleep on the floor. I left him alone, and hurried into the bathroom, poured with hot water. I was repeatedly scrubbed by the skin that Sydney Warren had touched. It wasn't until a layer of skin was about to peel off that the nausea was relieved. I locked the bedroom door, and had a good night's sleep. When he woke up the next day, Sydney Warren had just woken up. He slept on the cold floor all night and was sore. When he saw me, he couldn't help frowning. How do I sleep here? Don't you know how to help me back to my room? I poured myself a glass of milk. You drank too much last night, and you had to sleep on the floor. I have an old wrist injury that I can't use my strength. Don't you know? Sydney Warren froze, as if he had just remembered an old wound on my wrist. A hint of emptiness flashed in his eyes, and he quickly changed the subject. I see your suitcases piled up in the living room. Are you going on a business trip? I nodded, not denying it. I didn't miss the flash of joy in Sydney Warren's eyes. He frowned, and asked with a feigned concern, Sister, how long are you going? In fact, Sydney Warren didn't play well at all. It's only because in the past that I had a filter called love for him, so I was deceived by him. Not sure yet. I took a sip of milk and replied honestly. Sydney Warren thought I was only going for 3 or 5 days. After all, in the past, even if I was on a business trip, I would try my best to squeeze myself, and then rush back to see him as soon as possible. It's a pity not this time. His tail note is long, and he habitually softens his voice and coquettishly with me. Sister, I'll miss you. You have to come back early. I bent my eyes at him, but I didn't speak. Instead, he replied softly in his heart, I won't come back. Before leaving, I gave Sydney Warren a gift. I asked Sophia to meet him. The little girl probably thought that this was a signal from me to invite me to fight, and specially drew an eyeliner that flew to her temples. As a result, after I finished the recording, her eyeliner was completely cried. The black pressure was pressed against the tail of her eyes. Sophia rubbed her eyes and cursed with a crying voice. Sydney Warren, you bastard. While I understood her feelings, I couldn't help but feel funny. I pulled out a tissue and handed it to her. And then I spoke slowly. So, when you knew that he had a girlfriend, he was still having an affair with you, and even slept with you, don't you think he's a bastard? Sophia knows it's wrong, crumpled the tissue in his hand until it was wrinkled, and then squeezed out a sentence. He lied to me. It was Sydney Warren who said that you were blackmailing him with money to go to school. He has to be with you. I remember the year I met Sydney Warren, who was a freshman and served dishes in the restaurant. Because he accidentally broke the wine glass, he was scolded by the manager and bloody. Young King Yao's shoulders lowered a little in the scolding and Evrion's lively gaze. It was as if he was going to descend into the dust. It was as if I had seen myself as I used to be. I couldn't bear it, so I lost money for him. This would have been an inconsequential episode, but as soon as I walked out of the restaurant, he hurried out. He still hasn't taken off his uniform for the restaurant, white shirt and suit pants, with the childishness of a young man between his eyebrows. Sister, thank you just now. I chuckled. You're chasing it out just to say thank you again. He shook his head fast. I want to exchange contact information with you, so that I can repay the money later. I was about to open my mouth and say no, met his lost eyes, and his heart unconsciously softened for a moment. Okay. His eyes lit up when he received my answer. Can't wait to hand my phone in front of me. After exchanging contact details, everything became logical. My relationship with Sydney Warren has gradually become closer. Naturally, I also knew his background. Sydney Warren's father died at an early age, and his mother dragged him until he graduated from high school. He also competed and was admitted to the university of his choice. It's a pity that fate makes people. Along with the admission letter, the mother's medical diagnosis. Her mother's health deteriorated so much that Sydney Warren had to give up her studies and work odd jobs to earn a meager salary and fill the bottomless pit of medical bills. It's too similar. It's too similar to who I used to be. I couldn't resist the urge to pull him along. When Sydney Warren was notified by the hospital that someone had paid for his surgery, he was stunned. Then, I called the phone as soon as possible. Through the faint sound of electricity, Sydney Warren gasped for a few times before he spoke. Thank you. Even then, a noticeable choking can be heard. I took the paper bag from the clerk. The Cantonese song in the cafe happened to sing the line, You fly high. Tomorrow will be more beautiful. Facing the afternoon sun, I gently curled the corners of my lips. Sydney Warren, let me see it too. You're flying tomorrow. Before Sydney Warren went back to school, he sent me an IOU. He found a part-time job on campus, which, along with a scholarship, greatly eased his stress. I receive my payouts on time every month. Actually, I didn't expect Sydney Warren to pay back. Over the years, after my career has improved, I have successively sponsored many people. It's just that the person I met at that time happened to be Sydney Warren. If it were someone else, I would still do it. This should be considered a form of self-healing. It seems that as long as I hold up an umbrella for others, maybe in some parallel time and space, there will also be an umbrella gently resting on the isolated and helpless self in the past. Such days went on for a long time. It wasn't until Sydney Warren's sophomore year that he was appreciated and bought his paintings at a high price. It happened to be Chinese New Year's Eve, and Sydney Warren asked me out for dinner. When I got to the restaurant, he hadn't come yet. After waiting for a while, there was no sign of Sydney Warren. I was a little worried, so I went out and stood on the side of the street waiting for him. It didn't take long for a blurry figure in the distance. It's Sydney Warren. He ran in a hurry, holding a large cluster of roses in his arms. A few petals fluttered and fell on the snow, and the red was eye-catching. Before I could speak, he suddenly called out my name, Sarah Peacock. This is the first time. I was stunned, and I had a vague sense that Sydney Warren had something to say to me. He raised his hand, and a bank card was handed to me. This is the money from the sale of the paintings. and the money I have saved in the past 2 years is enough to pay off my mother's medical bills. I frowned, and I wanted to tell Sydney Warren not to be in such a hurry to pay back, but as if he had seen through my intentions, he pressed the card into my palm. You must take it. Sydney Warren looked down at me. I could see his lips trembling. Obviously, his voice was not too loud, but he unexpectedly said, because I want to say that I like you honestly. Later, Sydney Warren told me, the reason why he was late that day was actually that he had spent all his money at the flower shop, and he forgot to leave the money for his car, so he had to run all the way from the bus stop. Sydney Warren spoke without a hint of embarrassment on his face. The proprietress is very good. She knows that I am going to confess, and the money is not enough, so she specially wiped my change. His eyes were downcast, his amber pupils glowing, so much so that I can clearly capture my reflection in Sydney Warren's eyes. Sarah Peacock, it was the luckiest day of my life, because you have promised my confession. At that moment, I really thought that I was not looking at the wrong person. Don't you want to take revenge on him? Sophia's voice was hoarse, and the resentment in her eyes was too palpable. I was too calm by comparison. I shook my head, not intending to stay. He's not worth my energy. Of course, what you want to do is your business. Life in a foreign country is not much different than before. The roommate is a student who comes to study, and he is a fresh age, full of life. When I got off work, I happened to bump into Sebastian Jack standing in front of a full-length mirror in the living room, repeatedly looking at her makeup. She frowned, removing the original color from her lips, replaced with a pink lip gloss. Hearing the sound of me opening the door, she turned her head sharply. Sister Sarah Peacock, you're back. Look, the shade on my lips doesn't match today's outfit. I read it carefully and commented, it's beautiful. Are you going out? My favorite band has a live house performance tonight, but I remember you don't usually listen to rock. Hey. I deliberately teased her with words. Sure enough, Sebastian Jack's face was hot. Well, it's their lead singer, who looks really good. Really, you'll know it when you see it. She took my arm and changed the subject. That's right, you just come with me to have a look. Anyway, tomorrow is a holiday. You work so hard, it's time to relax. I couldn't beat Sebastian Jack, and was dragged into the underground club. Dry ice creates a psychedelic stage effect, and the rapid beat of the drum strikes out the catharsis. Sebastian Jack took my arm and pointed to me excitedly, standing in the middle of the spotlight with the blonde lead singer. Look. I followed her fingertips and looked over. For a moment, his eyes were drawn to the drummer behind him. The black hair drooped slightly, revealing a loose wildness. The drumstick flew in his hand, and the muscles in his arm swelled even more, and a small bead of wet sweat was distributed. Sebastian Jack didn't notice my gaze wandering. Isn't it handsome? I said and said, it's pretty handsome. After Sebastian Jack's favorite band left the show, she mysteriously said that she had some connections and wanted to go backstage, and asked me if I wanted to join us. I really didn't have the heart to join in the fun, so I waved my hand and refused. 10 minutes later, I received a meme pack from Sebastian Jack for selling cuteness. Hey, Sister Sarah Peacock, I probably won't be going back tonight, but you can't go back alone. So I asked my cousin to send you back. I just wanted to go back to her and don't need it. A dark shadow suddenly fell in front of me, and I looked up. It was the drummer just now. He changed into a gray hoodie, and his wet black hair should have been grabbed casually, a little messy, and he could vaguely smell a little mint cool smell. Sarah Peacock. The other person read my name, and his voice was slightly lower. You're Sebastian Jack's cousin. He nodded and gave his name. Victor Spender. Victor Spender gave me a drop-off at the door of the apartment. I thanked him briefly, pulled the door and got out of the car. The weather was not good tonight. The clouds were overshadowed, and there was not even a trace of a star. It is a vague sign that it is about to rain. The center of the eyebrows frowned unconsciously. No matter how long it has been, I still hate rainy days as always. I would have liked to go and rest after taking a shower. As a result, when I got out of the bathroom, I only heard a boom, as the thunder sounded like a crack in his ears. The light in his field of vision dimmed mercilessly. My heart tightened, and I barely managed to stand firm with my palms supporting the wall at my side. It's all right. It's okay. It's gone. I comforted myself over and over again, but uncontrollably. The painful memories of the past began to flash back in front of my eyes. 11 years ago, it was also such a thunderstorm night. I had my right hand smashed off by my own father. The face of the middle-aged man, who was in a fit of rage, turned purple. I was caught off guard and thrown to the ground by him, my ears buzzing, blood oozing from the corners of my mouth. Do you think Lao Tzu doesn't know what you're thinking about applying to a university outside the province from me? He grabbed my hair, and the disgusting smell of alcohol hit my face. Isn't it just like your slut mom, who wants to run? At the mention of my mother, the expression on his face became more and more fierce, and his scarlet eyes almost burst out. You can't shake off my, don't even try to dump me, he muttered to himself. The corners of his lips hooked a strange arc, which made people look frightened. I tried to escape, but I was crushed to death and couldn't move. I could only watch as he grabbed the wooden stick of the mop and slammed it on my right hand with all his might. 1, 2. The pain swept through the nerve endings in an instant, and I screamed so hard that I passed out. It almost became a nightmare that haunted me for the rest of my life. Even if 11 years have passed since that memory, even if the perpetrator of the violence has been sent to a mental hospital by my own hands, I still can't get rid of it. The right wrist was in phantom pain again. Trembling violently, I tried to hold it, but my whole body started to tremble. It was at this time that the door was pushed open. It's too dark. I looked up in alarm. Only a vague figure approached me. The sound of the rain intensified the fear. I broke down and realized that I was crying until my voice was hoarse. Don't come here. As soon as my voice fell, the figure really stopped. There was a soft light in front of me. Through the light source, I could see the people who were coming. It's Victor Spender. He was wearing a noisy dampness, and the sweatshirt on his body was wet, and the water marks were leaking. Victor Spender held up his flashlight and saw my embarrassment. He looked at the tear stains on my face, rolled his Adam's apple slowly, and said astringently, Sarah Peacock, are you okay? Hearing Victor Spender's concerned greeting, I breathed a sigh of relief for the rest of my life. Then a wave of grievances sprung up. Maybe it's the repetition of tonight's nightmare that overwhelms my mental defenses. I started crying again. It only took 2 seconds to go from crying silently to burying himself in his knees and sobbing like a child. Victor Spender was half kneeling in front of me, half an arm's length away. He hesitated to put his grip on my back and coaxed abruptly. What's going on? It was like I had found a fulcrum. Grabbed Victor Spender's clothes, and cried even harder. It hurts. My hands hurt so much. Victor Spender coaxed me to get the medicine kit. He spread out his palm, and told me to put my right hand on it. I did. Victor Spender looked at my wrist, which was obviously not traumatic, and said nothing. Instead, he carefully drugged me, wrapped it in gauze a few times, and finally tied a nondescript bow. Are you feeling better? Outside the house, there was still lightning and thunder. The flash of lightning brightened Victor Spender's eyes, and he lost the wildness of playing the drums. All that remained was peace that brought me ashore from the storm. I wiped the tears from my face and replied, much better. Seeing that I had calmed down, Victor Spender helped me to sit down on the couch. I turned around and looked for the cause of the power outage. After a while, the lights in the living room came on. Just tripped, Victor Spender explains. I nodded and asked him, why did you come here all of a sudden? The sofa was sunk into a corner, and Victor Spender sat beside me. It was Sebastienne Jack, who called me out of the blue, and she said that, when it comes to a thunderstorm, your mood will change. Just called you a few times and no one answered, so please let me take a look. There have been a few thunderstorms before, and I spent it watching movies with Sebastienne Jack. I thought I was hiding it well, but I didn't expect to be noticed by her. Did Sebastienne Jack tell you about the spare key I have in my hand? If not, Victor Spender realized in hindsight, and he pulled the key out of his pocket and handed it back to me. I pressed it back into my palm again. As I said, you don't have to worry. On the first day I shared a house with Sebastienne Jack. She said she had a cousin who was studying here. Her mother couldn't take care of her, so she asked for a spare key, for her cousin to come and take care of it from time to time. However, in the past 6 months, Victor Spender has not been here once. I leaned back on the couch, and a feeling of exhaustion hit me. I am afraid that if I close my eyes, it will be a nightmare. I sighed and leaned back on the couch, not noticing Victor Spender getting up again. The brightest light is turned off. There was only a little glare of warm light left in the room, and the sound of cold walking. The TV is turned on, and it is very common for a romance movie. I wrapped my pillow around and relaxed a little in this quiet and flowing atmosphere. I yawned, tears instantly filling my eyes. Sleepy. Do you want to go to bed and rest? Victor Spender asked me. I shook my head and pinched the soft flesh of my arm, forcing myself to come to my senses. Wait for the thunderstorm to pass before going to sleep. I'm afraid I won't be able to sleep later. Victor Spender didn't ask me what the cause of my insecurity was. He just accompanied me to finish watching the movie and find a new one. There was no impatience from start to finish. Until I yawned. Finally, he couldn't resist and fell crooked on Victor Spender's shoulder, and fell asleep completely. A second before I closed my eyes, I could see that Victor Spender's face was particularly soft under the flow of light and shadow in the film. His voice was soft. Have a good dream. Early the next morning, I was woken up by the screams of Sebastian Jack. I opened my eyes in a daze, and there was Victor Spender's face in close proximity. I had such a moment of embarrassment, panicked up, and almost tripped over the blanket that fell on the ground. Brother, Sister Sarah Peacock, you. Victor Spender is woken up. He moved his arm, which was numb by me, and frowned. What's your name? Sebastian Jack was stunned for a moment, and immediately changed his words. Sister-in-law. Me. Victor Spender. Victor Spender and I struggled to convince Sebastian Jack that nothing had happened last night. She became passionate about creating space for me and Victor Spender. I've euphemistically said that's not good. Who would have expected Sebastian Jack to rightly reply to me? What's this, Sister Sarah Peacock? You can just play with my brother as a free little lover. You think he's only 23. Young and beautiful, still playing drums, and his strength and physical strength are top-notch. Or do you not like him? I can't deny it. After that rainy night, I do have a crush on Victor Spender, but that doesn't mean much in the adult world. It's like I once had a love for Sydney Warren, but I'm still able to pull back and let time dilute that little emotion, including my fondness for Victor Spender at the moment. Perhaps it was just a buffer period after the drawbridge effect, and it would be completely subsided in another 10 days and half a month. So I said, because I am not compatible with him. Two kinds of people who don't match anywhere in terms of age, family background, and future. Victor Spender was 23 years old, the same age as Sydney Warren. He has a good family background, and the family relationship is not as weak as mine. In a few months, he will return to China and unfold a picture of his own future. And I'm different. I didn't plan to go back, so I asked Stella to help me sell the house before I left. She complimented me on my crispness. Actually, it's not simply. It's just that I know there's nothing there to keep me. Sebastian Jack didn't understand what I meant, but I'm sure Victor Spender got it, because he never set foot in our shared apartment, under the pretext of coming to see Sebastian Jack again. 3 months have passed. Sebastian Jack knocked on the side, saying that Victor Spender was about to return home. The band had a small show, and asked me if I wanted to go along. I hesitated for a moment, and then I wanted to forget it. The phone vibrates. It was a message from Victor Spender, who hadn't been in touch for a long time. There are only 3 words. I'll wait for you. An inexplicable emotion came back to my heart. I thought about it for a long time, but I changed my clothes and went with Sebastian Jack. Think of it as a farewell. The place where the band performs is a meadow by the lake. There were quite a few people who came, and Sebastian Jack and I stood at the back. On the one hand, we can't squeeze in, and on the other hand, Sebastian Jack recently broke up with the blonde lead singer, and it's really not appropriate to meet. With the sound of drums, the crowd began to cheer. Sebastian Jack and I were infected, and we waved our arms and tried to jump up to see the people on stage. After not seeing him for 3 months, Victor Spender seems to have lost some weight. The lining is sharper and sharper, simple black and white. Victor Spender wears only a silver chain around his neck. As his drumming movements flew, the boy's spirit was like opening a bottle of carbonated drink that had shaken too much, and it was bubbling up. Come out. I watched seriously and bumped into Victor Spender's eyes. The moment seemed to be slowed down, and Victor Spender's gaze was as aggressive as if it were substantive. I staggered my eyes, and when I looked back, Victor Spender had already moved his gaze back to the drum. I think it must be an illusion. I'm too far away from Victor Spender for he to be out of sight of me. I wasn't going to say goodbye to Victor Spender in person. I just wanted to slip away before the show ended. But what I didn't expect was that Victor Spender would be pronouncing my name on stage. Sarah Peacock. As a drummer, the spotlight rarely rests on him. But at this moment, Victor Spender was standing in the center. He held the microphone and spoke in a language that the audience under the podium could not understand. I've decided to stay. I was stunned. I saw that the people who were originally huddled together spontaneously made a way for me, the way to the stage, by Victor Spender's side. I don't know if I want to walk over there. Can you walk past it and get to the end? I don't know the answer, but Victor Spender gave me the answer. He jumped off the stage and walked towards me, not to stay for you, but because I want to stay with you. It was as if a piece of cotton had been blocked in his throat, and he was sore and swollen. Victor Spender. Even if you can say you like me today, what about tomorrow? The day after tomorrow? The day after tomorrow? And the future? I don't want to say something discouraged, but my experience doesn't allow me to add a blind filter to love. Sydney Warren said he loved me so sincerely, but no matter how sincere the feelings are, they will deteriorate. I don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. Victor Spender bent his eyes, and he wiped away the tears from my eyes. The future is uncertain, but I really want to hold your hand at the moment, and have a future with you. Will you give me a chance? Let's go and see what our future belongs to. On the first anniversary of our relationship with Victor Spender, we moved in together. Sebastian Jack returned home on the front foot, and Victor Spender entered the room with his luggage, under the pretext that he was worried that I would not be safe to sleep alone. We also raised a golden retriever, called Chasing the Wind. As the name suggests, the dog would often pounce on Victor Spender and arch over him for a while, and when Victor Spender was angry, he ran away with a puff of smoke, leaving only a gust of wind. I helplessly watched the back of a man and a dog chasing after the whole yard. In the end, it was Victor Spender who was defeated. His hair was arched and his eyes drooped, more like a puppy than chasing the wind. I couldn't hold back and laughed. Then I was rubbed by Victor Spender, his messy hair rubbing against the skin around my neck. Itching, I begged for mercy. Who would have thought that Victor Spender's movements were getting more and more excessive, and his lips pressed against my collarbone again and again, and every now and then he crushed them with the tips of his teeth. Grind. Annoyed, I patted him. Victor Spender. At the same time, a voice full of nostalgia sounded. Sister. I looked at it in amazement, barely recognizable as Sydney Warren. He's changed so much that I can't even recognize him. Victor Spender, who was buried in my neck, heard this and immediately went off the alarm. He stood in front of me and glanced Sydney Warren up and down. Do you think you're so tender that you call everyone your sister? Sydney Warren was choked by Victor Spender, but he endured it and looked at me stubbornly. Sister, do you really want me? It happened to be chasing the wind and running over. Victor Spender glanced at it and sneered. We don't have a shortage of dogs in our house. Why don't you ask someone else? The first time I saw Victor Spender with this face, I couldn't help but laugh. Sydney Warren, who had not changed his expression under Victor Spender's cynicism, suddenly had red eyes. Sarah Peacock, can't we really talk? There's nothing to talk about, I replied to him neatly. I've heard Stella say it, and I know that after I left, you coaxed Sophia for a while, and you couldn't bear the hardships of life, and you fell in love with the Gold Lord. I was found out by Sophia, and I was expelled from school after the matter got big, and the owner couldn't stand Sophia's repeated troubles, and abandoned you. With every word I spoke, Sydney Warren's spine dropped an inch lower. You're not coming to me, now because you know you're wrong, but because you can't go on anymore, and start thinking about the good life I provided for you. It's boring, Sydney Warren. If you have a little backbone to pay me back then, your life won't be like this. Sydney Warren's eyes lost focus, and the brilliance that had left me in love was gone. Some are just a muddy confusion. Don't come to me again. I won't look back. I hope you don't have a big dream of looking back. I stood in the courtyard and watched Sydney Warren disappear, like the walking dead, fade out of my world step by step. What the future holds for him, I don't know, but I turned my face sideways, looked at Victor Spender, who still had some unevenness in his eyes, and curled my lips. The wind rubbed against my calves flatteringly. I've grabbed the future I want. End. Last time I saw Sydney Warren, it was me and Victor Spender, who came to meet our parents. And he was the waiter who came to serve the food. The uniform is very similar to the one I wore when Sydney Warren and I first met, only this time we won't have any more intersections. Sydney Warren put down the dish with a lifeless look in his eyes, and he didn't even feel the slightest embarrassment when he looked at me. I didn't give me a second look. Victor Spender, on the other hand, also likes to eat some flying vinegar, and he secretly hooked my fingers under the table and pinched them. It's so pestering that I can't pull it off. Provoked his parents on the other side to look at us with teasing eyes. The door was gently shut, as if fate had silently returned to its original trajectory. The end.